好事德，做您身边的清新空气管家。
英国牛津大学的现任校长路易斯·理查德森呢，在不久前于瑞士达沃斯接受了财新时间的专访。今年58岁的她是这所国际知名学府将近8个世纪以来的首位女校长。理查德森出生于爱尔兰的沃特福德郡，曾经就读于爱尔兰著名的高校3一学院。之后呢，他赴美留学，取得了加利福尼亚大学洛杉矶分校政治学的硕士学位。1981年至2001年期间，理查德森就读于哈佛大学的政府管理学院，先后担任过助教以及副教授，以国际安全和恐怖主义作为主要的学术研究领域。2009年起，他担任苏格兰圣安德鲁斯大学校长，凭借着出色的教学能力和丰富的行政管理经验，2016年的1月12日呢，理查德森正式出任了牛津大学的第272任校长。
Dr. Richardson, so great to have you on our program. So you are the first female chancellor in Oxford, more than 800-year history, and you also came from a humble family. So is it still more of an exception, or it's increasing a trend for Western university to have female leaders?
Well, I think the number of women leaders is still way too low. It's still less than 20% in the US and Europe. Significantly less in many countries. The pace of change is accelerating, so I think 20 years' time the numbers will be greater, but it's still too low for my preference. I think every profession you look at almost is shaped like a pyramid. The higher up you go, the fewer women there are. Over time, I'm confident that will change. As to one's background, I think education is the greatest driver of social mobility there is. I believe passionately in the power of education to ensure people of all backgrounds and to ensure that the brightest get to the top. And we at Oxford are really committed to trying to identify and recruit the smartest students of whatever background.
2月1号晚上，英国议会下院投票决定支持政府提交的脱欧法案，授权首相启动脱欧程序。隔日呢，英国政府又公布了脱欧计划白皮书，以法律文件的形式明确了脱欧的目标。这意味着英国向正式脱欧又迈进一步。然而呢，就有不少人开始担忧了。随着脱欧步伐的加快，在英国政治、经济和社会等领域的影响也日益凸显。而在教育领域呢，脱欧可能导致的欧盟留学生人数锐减、师资流失、科研经费或许难度加大等问题，也成为了英国各个高校的担忧所在。
So increasingly we see a version of Brexit, which hard Brexit. How does Oxford position on this, and how will it affect international students, including Chinese students?
Well, Oxford has been fairly public in, first of all, in hoping that the British population would not vote for Brexit. And now that the population has, we're concerned in 3 areas. We're concerned about the 15% of our students who are citizens of the EU. They will have to pay international fees, so the same fees as a Chinese student or an American student, which means a big increase in fees for them. So we worry their numbers will decline. 17% of our staff are citizens of EU countries. We worry that they might leave because they feel unwelcome or because they're concerned about their research being funded. Our biggest concern is research funding and the collaboration that free movement allows us. So 12% of our research funding comes from the European Research Council. More important than the funding, it's the networks of collaboration that free movement allows. And we worry very much about the loss of that. From a Chinese perspective, it's actually potentially positive in the sense that we are going to have to redouble our efforts to form collaborations and alliances beyond the EU. The government wants us to do that. We're deeply international anyway. We want to have as many international collaborations. What we care about is people's intellect, not the color of the passport.
So do you have any suggestions for Chinese students as to whether they should keep coming to study in British universities?
Oh, of course they should come to the UK. Well, Oxford has just been named the best university in the world. They should try to study in the best university in the world. Chinese students are ambitious. I worry we may have fewer EU students. We're actually working hard to raise funds to give scholarships for EU students once Brexit occurs. Chinese point of view, this is a wonderful educational system, and it benefits from Chinese students and all international students, because again, We need to educate our students to enter an international workforce. So the more global experience they have, the better. And I speak as somebody, I was raised in Ireland, I got my PhD in America, I ran a university in Scotland, and now I'm running Oxford. So I believe very much in this international community of academics.
So Oxford has traditionally played a very prominent role in many aspects of British society, including British politics. So in this area of more uncertainty and more anti-establishment sentiment, do you see Oxford's role in British society will persist?
I think we really have a job to do at Oxford. So I started in Oxford just a year ago. What I encountered in Oxford was a forward-looking, meritocratic, creative, dynamic cosmopolitan community, completely at variance with the image you often see in the press. And so I think we have real work to do to persuade British society that Oxford is good for them. That no matter where your child goes to school, if they're really smart and really hardworking, they can aspire to come to Oxford. They can have an opportunity to come to Oxford. We have lots of programs now to bring in students in the summer, students from schools that don't normally send kids to Oxford. Every summer we bring in 850 of these students just for a week to expose them to the university. And about 25% of those students end up as students at Oxford because they come, they discover it's not what they expected, that they could fit in, and they apply and come in. But I think we really have work to do to ensure that the external perception of Oxford matches the reality that is Oxford.
形势跌宕起伏的2016年让不少人颇觉意外，反全球化浪潮汹涌，特朗普当选，英国退欧，让长期掌控欧美话语权的精英阶层和各国民众之间的裂痕越来越清晰。各国频发的恐怖袭击事件让国际安全以及反恐形势被推到了舆论的聚光灯下炙烤，阶级鸿沟、贫富差距催生了民粹主义，恐怖主义阴云依旧笼罩在上空。2017年，人们究竟该如何应对当前还没有明朗的国际局势？对此呢，理查德森也给出了自己的建议。
So Davos is considered by many as an elite club. So after its traumatic 2016, how will the divide be healed?
Well, that's a tough question. The reality, as we all know, is income inequality is growing. I do see education as one of the ways to mitigate that. But I think we have to be much more focused on the situation that is being faced by those who've lost out through globalization. I think we've seen in the voting patterns in the US and in the UK and potentially in other countries in forthcoming elections this year that people have felt globalization hasn't benefited them, that free trade to which so many of us elites are committed has not benefited everyone. I believe over the longer term it will, but I think we've learned a lesson this year that ensure that people across society realize the advantages of immigration, of free trade, of elite institutions. So yes, Davos is seen as a collection of the elite. My own view is that there's a difference between elite and elitism. Everybody is very proud of elite football teams. They need to be proud of elite universities too, but there's a difference between elite and elitism. Elite just means selective, but so long as everybody of any background has the opportunity to enter that elite because of their drive, their ambition, and their talents, I think society will always will never be entirely egalitarian, but we have to ensure equality of opportunity, I think.
So the issue of terrorism has been a major topic in recent years, which is also your main area of research. So how do you see the issue of terrorism going forward?
Well, I think it's very important to remember that the numbers of people killed by terrorism is still tiny. I'm not assuming we're not talking about Syria, but in a country like China or in countries in Europe or indeed in the US, it's a tiny number statistically compared to people who are killed by drunk drivers or any number of other issues. So I think it's important to keep the terrorist threat in perspective. And I think we see too much to terrorists if we exaggerate their importance, if we act like this is an existential crisis when it isn't. Part of our goal, it seems to me, has to be to not to overreact to the atrocities they commit, because to do so plays into their hands and exaggerates their importance. It seems inevitable to me that we will have further small-scale attacks, as we've seen in Germany recently, or indeed in Istanbul, and last year in France. It seems inevitable that we will have more of these kind of attacks. And I don't want to be hard-hearted about it, but the numbers affected are likely to be very small. So it's important that we not jeopardize the principles that we value so much out of a sense of fear. And one of the best weapons against terrorism is a resilient population. So I think we will continue to have terrorist attacks, but I certainly don't think any Chinese students or any of us should change the way we live out of fear of them.
目前，中国学生已经成为了牛津大学的第3大学生来源群体，仅次于英国和美国。在科研和教学领域，牛津大学与中国的互动交流也越来越紧密。自2015年起，首次向中国大陆学生开放申请的罗德奖学金项目，将在今年迎来第2批中国学生。2016年底，与苏州工业园区管委会合作共建的牛津大学苏州先进研究中心，是牛津大学在海外设立的第1个实体法人的多学科创新研发中心。对于这些项目目前的进展情况呢，理查德森也为我们介绍了详细的状况。
So in 2015, we have the first batch of 4 Rhodes Scholars coming to Oxford, and we just added 4 new ones. So how's your life in Oxford?
Oh, I think they're having a wonderful time. I think it's very important to the Rhodes Scholarship that we expand internationally, and the Chinese students have led the internationalization. This year we've expanded to areas in the Middle East and so on. So we have 4 extraordinary young people studying a range of subjects. They're contributing enormously to the group by bringing their different perspectives and experiences. And I'm told that the 4 young people we have coming next year, again, studying a range of different subjects, have equally impressive CVs. And I know everybody in Rhodes House is looking forward to welcoming them. So we're delighted to have these Rhodes Scholars, and I trust they're having a wonderful time. It's an extraordinary experience.
So is there any collaboration between the Rhodes Scholar and Tsinghua's recent Schwarzman Scholars? How do you see its progress in Tsinghua?
Oh, well, we've had lots of discussions and collaborations with Mr. Schwarzman as he was designing the program. I've had many meetings with him, and so have my team. That is a slightly different orientation, but it's the same general idea. How do we ensure that the very best and brightest and most publicly minded of our young people have international experience, because they're entering a globalized world, notwithstanding recent setbacks. The world is ever more globalizing, and the people who will succeed in it are those who understand different cultures, can operate in different cultures, can speak different languages. So I think it's just part of the wave of the future. We're trying to adapt our education to that future.
So Oxford recently established a research center in the city of Suzhou. How is its significance? And how do you see the choice between a research center versus, say, a campus in China?
Right. Well, I don't anticipate our creating a campus. We're very excited about OSCAR, which is the OSCAR Center for Advanced Research in Shizad. It will enable us to do lots of research that we might not otherwise have done. It will forge collaborations with key Chinese researchers. It will allow us to appeal for a broader range of research funding, because we have people from different nationalities and so on. So we're very excited about the potential. Most of the focus will be on areas in which there's a particular reason to do research on China, whether it's in climate mitigation and so on. Now, establishing a campus is entirely different, and we have no desire to establish a campus beyond Oxford. And that's because the model we have has evolved over almost 900 years. We believe it would be impossible to replicate anywhere, and not just China, in Europe, anyplace else, because it's based on the collegiate system. Each student who comes in is in a small college, and they interact with people, both students and academics of all disciplines, in the small community built around a collegiate quad. So you could build the buildings in another country, but it would be enormously difficult to lift the entire educational apparatus over, because you wouldn't just be bringing the teachers in the subjects they're studying. The whole point of the collegiate system is to expose people to people in fields that they're not studying. Sits at dinner next to an English student, and across the way is a professor of French. So we think it would be impossible to replicate that elsewhere. Now, I don't want to sound old-fashioned. We think we're very forward-looking, and we're constantly adapting, and not all of our colleges are ancient buildings. Some are, but we have some more modern ones. But the whole concept of the collegiate system, we feel, cannot be replicated elsewhere.
So I heard from a famous Oxford and Harvard historian, American schools is being accused of a bit unfair when admitting Asian or Chinese students. I don't know whether that's true. What's your perspective? And how's the situation in the UK?
Well, I think the admissions in American universities is very different from British universities, or especially very different from Oxford. But our admissions are very different. Instead of having a centralized admissions by the whole university, a student, and this is what makes it so difficult for an international student to apply to Oxford from overseas. It seems very complicated. You apply to study a subject in a college. And if you're from outside Britain, that must seem incredibly complicated. Or even parts of Britain where they don't normally send students to Oxford. But we are committed to finding the very brightest student, irrespective of their race, irrespective of their background, and irrespective of their socioeconomic status, I think.
So how would you recommend Chinese universities in terms of going towards a direction of more interdisciplinary or general education like in the US, or a more focused education like in the UK?
Well, I would answer that sequentially. I do think most of the real discoveries are happening at the interstices of disciplines, at the interdisciplinary level.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can do good interdisciplinary work until you're first trained really well in a discipline. So I prefer the more focused British approach. So you're well trained in one discipline, and then you get different people with bringing different perspectives on a shared problem. So going back to terrorism, for example, you look at you have the same issue of terrorism, but you can bring political scientists like me, or psychologists, or historians, or anthropologists, people trained in different disciplines to bear on the same problem. And that's where you start getting discoveries. But I do think it's a mistake to say, oh, everything's happening at the interdisciplinary level.
So in China, people very good at art typically don't get very good test scores, so they don't get to elite universities. Oxford actually played a very prominent role on British art and theatre, with top performers and actors among its graduates. What's the secret? Well,
yes, I think we want it. It's so important for the humanities. We believe passionately in the humanities. We always have. And the arts, isn't it? There's such an extraordinary tradition of the arts in China. I think it would be a shame if very clever and ambitious people were not also going into the arts. So many, especially in times of economic uncertainty, I think young people are sometimes more conservative than they need to be, more cautious. They want to study a subject that will guarantee them a good income, and you can understand family pressure to do that, or family concern about the cost of education and the needs for economic security. And yet, I think it's more important that students follow their hearts and study what they really care about. Certainly, a student lucky enough and smart enough to study at a university like Oxford or many of the great Chinese universities, they would be fine no matter what they study. So I think students should study the things they love, whether it's theatre or French cinema or astrophysics. They should study what they love.